I was sitting alone at the corner of a small cafe, trying to make sense of the mess that had unraveled in my life over the past few months. My phone buzzed again, another text from my husband, asking if we could talk. I had been avoiding his calls, too afraid to face the reality that we were unraveling, slowly and painfully. He had confessed the affair, and while the details were still hazy, the gut-wrenching truth was clear: he had betrayed me, emotionally and physically. Feeling both empty and hollow, I couldn't shake the sense that something was missing inside of me. I wasn't even sure what I was looking for. It wasn't love anymore, it was something darker, more confusing. That's when he walked in. A stranger, no older than 30, with eyes that seemed to see through me, right into the rawness I had tried so hard to bury. He must have noticed how disoriented I looked, how much I was trying to hold myself together. "Are you okay?" he asked, taking the seat across from me. There was something in his tone and understanding, perhaps, that made me lower my guard. The loneliness I felt was overpowering, and I welcomed the small talk he offered. We talked about nothing in particular, but somehow it was enough. For a fleeting moment, I could pretend that my life wasn't in chaos, that I wasn't haunted by the image of my husband with someone else. But then, the conversation shifted. He was kind, almost too kind, listening to me vent about my marriage, about the confusion I felt. He subtly slipped in lines that challenged my emotional resilience, that questioned whether I had truly been respected and loved. The words were innocuous, but in my fragile state they cut deep. Was I really good enough? Was my husband's betrayal a reflection of my own failings? I don't know what drew me in, whether it was the stranger's warmth or the bitter realization that I was missing the emotional connection that my marriage had failed to provide. Maybe it was a combination of both. The conversation grew more personal, and before I knew it, I was telling him things I hadn't even admitted to myself: how alone I felt, how worthless I had come to believe I was. I didn't notice when he reached across the table, gently touching my hand, but the gesture was enough to send a shiver down my spine. The emotions swirling inside me were suffocating, but they were also confusing. Was I being manipulated? Or was I finally receiving the comfort I had longed for? I pulled my hand away quickly, feeling a sense of shame wash over me. Was I betraying myself by allowing this stranger to get so close? But at the same time, I couldn't deny that I had been emotionally vulnerable, and in a twisted way, this connection felt real, even if temporary. Later, I would reflect on that moment with guilt. How had I allowed myself to become so emotionally entangled in the conversation, in the touch of a stranger, at the very time I should have been confronting my own heartache? The stranger had shown me a different kind of emotional connection, one that wasn't built on trust or love, but on the rawness of vulnerability. The emotional aftermath was harder to face. I couldn't help but wonder if I was simply looking for solace in the wrong places. The stranger had given me a taste of attention, but in reality he was a reflection of the emotional turmoil I had yet to fully confront. What was I really seeking? Comfort, validation, or simply someone to fill the void left by betrayal? The encounter with the stranger left me with more questions than answers. Was this what my emotional needs had come to: a fragile, fleeting connection with a stranger who didn't even know my name? Would I ever find the strength to rebuild myself, or was I destined to live in the shadow of my husband's betrayal, forever haunted by the complexity of emotions I couldn't quite unravel? Betrayal and emotional shock are among the most devastating experiences one can face in a relationship, and they often come with an overwhelming, gut-wrenching intensity. When betrayal happens, especially in the form of infidelity, it feels like a violent rupture in the very fabric of trust and love that had been carefully woven over time. In that moment of discovery, the world can feel like it's unraveling, and everything that once seemed certain becomes uncertain. The realization that someone you loved, trusted, and perhaps built a life with has chosen to share their intimacy with another person is a blow that doesn't just affect the relationship but shakes your sense of self to the core. The initial shock of betrayal is disorienting. It's not always a clear-cut, immediate understanding of what has transpired. Instead, it's a mixture of disbelief, confusion, and an aching denial that this could really be happening. The emotional shock often manifests physically. Your heart races, your stomach churns, your hands shake, and your thoughts feel fragmented. It's as if your brain can't comprehend the reality of the situation, and it struggles to process the flood of emotions that rush in. You might replay every moment in your relationship, scrutinizing every look, every word, every gesture for signs of something you missed. It's a haunting experience, as if the life you thought you were living is suddenly thrown into question, leaving you wondering if anything was real, or if you were always blinded by your own trust and love. In these first moments, the mind battles between wanting to confront the betrayal head-on and the desire to block it out, to pretend it's just a nightmare that will go away. There's also the crushing realization that the love and trust you had invested so much of yourself into was shattered. The emotional pain is not only caused by the affair itself, but by the sense of being made a fool of being lied to and deceived. The person who was supposed to protect your heart, to honor the bond you shared, has instead violated it in a deeply personal and intimate way. This betrayal stings because it strikes at the most vulnerable part of your emotional being, the need to feel loved, valued, and secure. When someone you deeply trust betrays that bond, it can feel like an attack on your very worth. The shock of betrayal often forces a person into an emotional limbo. You may feel numb, as if you're in a dream or watching someone else's life unfold. The world around you seems to blur, and it's difficult to focus on anything other than the hurt and confusion in your heart. But beneath that numbness, there is an overwhelming rush of emotions. Anger often follows close behind the initial shock, followed by sadness, deep sorrow, and even despair. The anger might be directed at your partner for breaking your trust, or at yourself for not recognizing the signs sooner. This anger isn't always immediate, though sometimes it brews quietly, like a storm that gradually intensifies over time, until it can no longer be contained. Sadness in the wake of betrayal is deep, often linked to feelings of inadequacy and fear of abandonment. You may wonder if you were ever truly loved, or if you were simply someone who was never worthy of that love. This sadness can also evolve into profound self-doubt, questioning your own worth, your attractiveness, or your ability to offer what your partner needs. The emotional toll of infidelity often drags a person into a spiral of self-questioning that can be difficult to escape. It's not just about the loss of trust in the partner, but also a loss of confidence in one's own ability to understand or navigate relationships. It's important to note that the shock of betrayal is not a singular moment, but rather a process. As you try to piece together the events that led up to this point, each revelation, each piece of information that confirms the betrayal hits harder than the last. With each new detail, the shock deepens and the emotional toll worsens. It's as if the betrayal doesn't just occur once, but continues to unfold, layer by layer, in a painful unraveling. And yet, despite this, there is often an instinctive need to hold on to hope, to look for reasons why things might improve, or to deny the severity of the situation altogether. The emotional shock of betrayal can cloud one's judgment and make it harder to let go of the person who has caused the pain, even when the rational mind understands that the relationship is no longer the safe space it once was. In many ways, the emotional shock of betrayal can be likened to the process of mourning. You mourn the loss of the relationship you thought you had, the idealized version of your partner, and the future you envisioned together. This type of grief is complicated because, unlike other forms of loss, it's often accompanied by anger, frustration, and a sense of injustice. How could someone who promised to love you betray that vow? How could they hurt you so deeply, so intimately? It's a grief that is tangled up in confusion and anger, and it can be difficult to separate the emotional pain of betrayal from the practical decisions that need to be made. The emotional shock of betrayal doesn't just end with the discovery, it lingers, haunting the person long after the initial revelation. It shapes how they view their partner, their relationship, and sometimes even themselves. It can lead to anxiety, trust issues, and difficulty opening up to others. Even if the relationship somehow survives, the emotional wounds of betrayal remain a part of the person, sometimes for a lifetime. This shock is not just an emotional experience, it reshapes the way a person moves through the world and navigates relationships going forward. The impact of betrayal is profound and far reaching, affecting not only the person betrayed but also their perception of love, trust, and the people they let into their lives. Invulnerability and isolation are two of the most profound emotional states that accompany the discovery of infidelity. When a person is faced with betrayal, it often triggers a deep sense of vulnerability, magnifying the emotional fragility already present in the relationship. Vulnerability, in the context of infidelity, isn't just about exposing one's feelings to others, but about confronting a truth that leaves the person feeling raw, exposed, and deeply unprotected. This feeling of vulnerability can manifest in various ways, often revealing hidden insecurities and fears that were previously buried beneath the surface of everyday life. It's as if the protective walls built over time have suddenly crumbled, and the individual is left facing the harsh reality of emotional exposure without any guard against the storm of hurt and confusion. The emotional fallout from infidelity leaves a person grappling with a profound sense of isolation. No matter how many people are around you, the experience of betrayal can create a feeling of being utterly alone. It's a solitude that feels unique to the individual, as though no one else could possibly understand the depths of the pain. This isolation is compounded by the difficulty of sharing such a personal and hurtful experience with others. There's often a hesitance to confide in friends or family, not just because of the shame or embarrassment, but also because the person may feel too vulnerable to expose themselves further. In many cases, the fear of judgment or the fear of seeming weak can prevent someone from seeking the emotional support they need. The emotional isolation that results from this is not just a feeling of physical aloneness, but a deep emotional detachment from the people and world around them. This isolation can create a dangerous cycle. The more isolated a person feels, the more vulnerable they become to further emotional harm. The sense of loneliness can become all-consuming, pushing the individual to search for emotional connection in places that might not be healthy or supportive. Vulnerability, which in a healthy relationship can be a source of strength and intimacy, becomes a double-edged sword in the aftermath of betrayal. The person feels emotionally exposed but lacks the safe environment necessary for healing. In this state of vulnerability, the person might be more susceptible to seeking comfort or validation in situations that, in retrospect, could be damaging. A stranger's kind words, a brief emotional connection, or a flirtation that offers temporary relief from loneliness can seem like lifelines, even if they ultimately lead to further confusion or regret. This emotional isolation, combined with vulnerability, also often leads to self-doubt. After discovering infidelity, a person may begin to question their worth, their attractiveness, and their ability to give love in a way that is fulfilling and true. This self-doubt is not simply a matter of insecurity but is tied to the betrayal itself. The person may wonder why their partner chose someone else, and this question lingers in the mind, creating an emotional storm of inadequacy and self-criticism. It's easy to fall into the trap of believing that if one had been more emotionally available, more attentive, or more physically attractive, the betrayal would never have happened. This type of thinking further isolates the individual from others, as it becomes difficult to reconcile feelings of hurt and shame with the desire for emotional closeness. In essence, the vulnerability created by infidelity leads to a toxic cycle of self-blame and withdrawal, where the individual feels as if they are too broken to be loved or understood. Isolation, however, isn't just about physical loneliness, it also encompasses a deeper emotional isolation within the relationship itself. Even if the person continues to live with or be around their partner after discovering the betrayal, a wall often forms between them. Emotional distance replaces the closeness that once defined the relationship, and the person feels estranged not only from their partner but from themselves. The trust that was once there has been shattered, and it becomes difficult to imagine how it could ever be rebuilt. Every glance, every word, every gesture now feels tinged with doubt and suspicion. The vulnerability that initially bonded the partners together now becomes the very thing that makes the person feel exposed and unsafe. The emotional isolation in this context is not simply about being apart physically, but about the inability to truly connect, even when in the same room. For many, the betrayal acts as a mirror that reveals just how emotionally vulnerable they were to begin with. The act of infidelity exposes the fragility that might have existed under the surface, whether in the form of unspoken fears, unmet needs, or unresolved emotional wounds. It is as if the betrayal lifts the curtain on the emotional state of the individual, forcing them to confront the very things they might have avoided or suppressed. In this way, infidelity can amplify feelings of isolation and vulnerability, making them feel even more unprotected and exposed to the world. This deeper emotional truth can be difficult to face, but it also offers an opportunity for self-reflection and growth. However, this growth often comes at the cost of more pain and discomfort as the person confronts their own vulnerability in the wake of betrayal. It's also important to note that vulnerability and isolation often create a perfect storm for unhealthy coping mechanisms. The person may turn to distractions, substances, or other behaviors to numb the emotional pain, seeking to avoid the vulnerability that feels so unbearable. This avoidance can further entrench the isolation, as the individual becomes more and more detached from their own emotions and the world around them. The need for emotional connection doesn't disappear, but it becomes harder to achieve in a healthy, sustainable way. The vulnerability created by infidelity can lead a person to build emotional walls, but those walls often have the unintended consequence of keeping out the very love and support they need to heal. Vulnerability and isolation after infidelity are intertwined emotional experiences that leave the person navigating a complex terrain of hurt, self-doubt, and confusion. The vulnerability that was once a foundation for emotional connection now feels like a weakness, and the isolation that follows creates a sense of detachment that is difficult to overcome. These emotions are compounded by the constant need for emotional healing, but the very vulnerability that makes healing possible also makes the process excruciatingly difficult. The stranger's role in the aftermath of infidelity is complex, often embodying a paradox of comfort and threat. In moments of emotional vulnerability, when a person feels unmoored from their sense of self and trust, a stranger can seem like a refuge. They are a blank slate, untainted by the betrayals or complications of past relationships, and for a brief moment, they represent a new emotional landscape, one that doesn't carry the heavy weight of history. However, this connection with a stranger, while offering temporary comfort or distraction, often brings with it an undercurrent of danger, as the emotional boundaries of the individual become blurred. The stranger becomes an unwitting catalyst for deeper emotional turmoil, a figure who can either provide healing or further complicate the pain of betrayal. One of the most striking aspects of the stranger's role is that they enter at a time when the person feels most exposed and vulnerable. After the shock of infidelity, the individual is emotionally raw, uncertain, and often searching for anything to make them feel whole again. A stranger, with no preconceived notions of who they are or what they've experienced, offers an emotional reprieve. The conversation with this person may start innocently enough, casual words exchanged over a cup of coffee, a brief encounter on a night out, or a simple act of kindness on a crowded street. But in these fleeting moments, the individual may feel an unspoken sense of understanding from the stranger, as if this person intuitively grasps the pain they're going through, even without knowing the full story. This connection can feel like a breath of fresh air, a reprieve from the suffocating isolation caused by betrayal. What makes these interactions particularly complicated is that the emotional relief offered by the stranger can be intoxicating. They are not burdened with the history of betrayal, and there's no weight of guilt or resentment hanging over the conversation. The individual can speak freely, without fear of judgment or the risk of being hurt further. In some cases, the stranger may even offer what seems like unspoken validation, a reflection of the emotional support that was absent from the relationship where infidelity occurred. The kindness of a stranger can feel like a balm for the wounds left by the betrayal, providing a temporary escape from the emotional chaos. It's a fleeting form of intimacy, one that doesn't require the same kind of emotional investment, and yet it offers the illusion of connection. The warmth of their attention, the simplicity of their kindness, and the absence of prior expectations can feel like the relief that was long sought after. This bond with a stranger is inherently fragile and precarious. The vulnerability that comes with emotional exposure in the wake of betrayal makes it easy to misinterpret kindness or attention from someone else as something deeper than it truly is. The stranger, even if their intentions are innocent, may unknowingly become an emotional crutch for the person reeling from infidelity. They may feel drawn to the stranger's attention, mistaking it for something that could fill the void left by the betrayal. This can lead to a dangerous emotional entanglement, where the individual begins to rely on this temporary connection to make sense of their fractured emotional world. It is easy to mistake the stranger's attentiveness for the love and security that was lost in the relationship, only to realize later that the stranger is merely a placeholder, a temporary distraction, rather than a genuine source of emotional support. The stranger's role becomes more complicated, as they may subtly manipulate the situation, either knowingly or unknowingly. In their moment of vulnerability, the individual may be more susceptible to influence, and a stranger may exploit this emotional fragility. They might offer advice, sympathetic words, or even gestures of affection that make the person feel seen and understood. However, this can quickly cross a line, especially if the stranger's motives are self-serving. In these moments, the individual is navigating an emotional minefield, unsure of whether the stranger's intentions are truly innocent or if they are subtly pushing the person into emotional territory they are not ready for. This can leave the individual feeling even more conflicted and uncertain about their own emotional needs. What started as a seemingly harmless encounter can evolve into a situation where boundaries are blurred, leading to confusion about what is real and what is not. This connection with a stranger often acts as a mirror to the individual's emotional state. They are not just interacting with this person, but also confronting their own vulnerabilities and needs. The stranger, in a way, holds up a reflection of the emotional gaps and wounds that were exposed by the betrayal. They may provide comfort, but they also unknowingly reveal the depth of the emotional work that remains to be done. As the person tries to connect with the stranger, they may realize that they are still searching for answers or closure from the betrayal, answers that cannot be found in temporary distractions or fleeting emotional connections. The stranger, in this sense, becomes a symbol of the larger emotional journey the person is on, one that involves healing from the betrayal and reclaiming their sense of self. The emotional consequences of this interaction with a stranger can also extend into the individual's relationship with their partner. The intimacy or emotional relief found with the stranger can amplify the disconnect with the partner who betrayed them. As the individual forms an emotional connection with someone outside the relationship, they may begin to reevaluate their expectations of love and connection. The comparison between the emotional comfort provided by the stranger and the pain caused by the betrayal can deepen feelings of resentment and distrust. It may even lead to the realization that the relationship is no longer capable of providing the emotional fulfillment that was once hoped for. The role of the stranger in the aftermath of infidelity is a reflection of the complexity of human emotions in the face of betrayal. While they can offer temporary comfort and the illusion of emotional relief, they also present the risk of further emotional confusion and entanglement. The interaction with the stranger, whether it leads to healing or further hurt, becomes a crucial chapter in the individual's emotional journey. It offers a glimpse into the fragility of emotional connections and serves as a reminder of the delicate balance between vulnerability and self-protection in a world that can often feel overwhelmingly uncertain and emotionally dangerous. The emotional impact of infidelity is not a singular event. It unfolds over time, with waves of confusion, hurt, and reflection continuously reshaping the way a person experiences the world around them. One of the most profound and complex effects of infidelity is the deep sense of emotional fragmentation it causes. When someone experiences betrayal, it feels as though the emotional wholeness they once knew is shattered into countless pieces. It's not just the relationship itself that has broken. The person's emotional sense of self, their sense of trust, and their understanding of love and connection are all disrupted. This fragmentation is a painful process because it forces the person to reckon with a reality they never anticipated, and often one they never thought they would face. It creates an emotional distance between the person and their partner, but it also creates an internal distance of feeling that they are no longer who they once were. The first sign of emotional fragmentation often manifests in an inability to make sense of the betrayal. The person might find themselves going over the events repeatedly, trying to understand how they missed the signs or why the betrayal happened. This constant mental replaying of events can create a sense of emotional disarray, as the individual tries to reconcile the person they thought they knew with the person who has now betrayed them. The mental and emotional dissonance can be overwhelming, as it feels like everything the person once believed about their relationship and their partner is suddenly called into question. The trust that was once a foundation is now fractured, and the emotional stability that the relationship provided is gone. The result is a pervasive sense of confusion, with every thought about the relationship or their partner feeling tangled and unclear. This emotional fragmentation extends to how the person views love, relationships, and intimacy. Infidelity often leads to a complete rethinking of what it means to be in a relationship, as the very nature of love is called into question. Was the love that they shared real? Was it truly unconditional? Or was it conditional on trust? These questions are not easily answered and can leave the individual feeling lost and unsure about their ability to love or be loved again. The emotional fragmentation makes it difficult to navigate feelings of love and loyalty after betrayal, leaving the person emotionally exhausted from trying to comprehend the complexities of their emotions. The idea of vulnerability, which once felt like a strength in the relationship, now feels like a dangerous liability, making the person wary of ever opening up to someone again. As the person struggles to understand what happened and why, they may begin to feel a deep sense of emotional disconnection, not only from their partner but from the people around them. The emotional fragmentation caused by infidelity often creates a barrier to emotional intimacy, leaving the person feeling disconnected from those they once felt close to. This is particularly difficult because, after betrayal, the need for emotional support is greater than ever. But the emotional fragmentation leaves the person unable to share their pain or their confusion, as they feel as though they are not capable of making sense of their own feelings, let alone articulating them to others. Even in the presence of those who care about them, the individual may feel alone in their emotional experience, as though no one can truly understand the depth of their pain. This sense of emotional isolation only exacerbates the fragmentation, creating a vicious cycle in which the individual feels increasingly separated from their own emotions and the people around them. The emotional fragmentation can also lead to a loss of confidence and self-worth. Infidelity often triggers an internal dialogue filled with self-blame and self-doubt, as the person starts to question what they did wrong. They may wonder if they were not enough, or if there was something lacking in themselves that made their partner seek comfort elsewhere. This line of thinking creates a sense of internal conflict, where the individual is simultaneously dealing with the betrayal while also battling feelings of inadequacy. This self-blame is often accompanied by the belief that the person cannot trust themselves to judge others or even understand their own emotional needs. This self-doubt can extend to their relationships with others, making it hard to trust friends, family, or even new partners. The fear of being hurt again becomes a constant companion, and the once strong emotional foundation of self-confidence crumbles, leaving the individual with a fractured sense of identity. As the emotional fragmentation continues, the person may feel emotionally detached from the things they once enjoyed or were passionate about. Hobbies, work, or social connections that once brought joy may now seem distant or unimportant. The emotional energy required to deal with the pain of betrayal often saps the individual's motivation to engage in other aspects of life. What was once a source of fulfillment now feels trivial in comparison to the emotional void caused by infidelity. This sense of numbness can lead to further isolation, as the individual retreats into themselves, unable to find joy or meaning in anything other than their pain. This detachment can also impact the individual's ability to experience intimacy in any form, as the emotional fragmentation creates a barrier to feeling close to others. The emotional fragmentation also has the potential to erode the person's sense of future. When a betrayal occurs, it's easy to feel as though the future is uncertain, and that any plans or dreams shared with a partner are now invalidated. The person may feel as though the foundation of their future has crumbled, and they are left standing in the ruins, unsure of where to go next. The very idea of building a future, whether with the same partner or someone new, feels overwhelming because the person can no longer trust their own judgment or vision. The emotional fragmentation leads to a fear of moving forward, as the individual is uncertain of how to rebuild from the brokenness. The emotional fragmentation caused by infidelity can be a catalyst for personal growth. While the process of healing is difficult, it often forces the individual to confront emotions, insecurities, and self-perceptions they may have never acknowledged before. This intense emotional reckoning can ultimately lead to a deeper understanding of oneself and one's needs, even though the journey is painful. However, this process takes time and is often marked by setbacks, as the person must carefully navigate the complex emotions of hurt, anger, and sadness before they can begin to heal. The fragmentation, though painful, can eventually give way to a new emotional clarity and a sense of self that is no longer defined by betrayal. Yet, this growth is not immediate, and it takes time to repair the shattered pieces of the person's emotional landscape.